Hi, I'm Will Johnston, Developer Advocate at WP Engine, and I'm here today to talk to you about Nuxt.js and Vue. We're going to be creating a headless WordPress site using Nuxt.js, so we'll create a list of posts and then show an individual post. Before I begin, I've already set up my WordPress site for headless, so I don't need to worry about that. If you need help setting up your WordPress site so it's ready for headless, I encourage you to go to developers.wpengine.com and read our blog post about setting up your WordPress site for headless. It guides you through installing the right plugins and configuring WordPress such that it's ready for headless development. So let's dive right in. Okay, I have my terminal open here to where I want to install my app. And in order to install a Nuxt.js app and start working with it, you're going to need Node and NPM at the very least. I already have those installed, so I'm good to go. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to run create Nuxt app. And I'll call this headless Nuxt demo. It's important not to say create next app. If you're used to creating next apps, which I am, you might accidentally type next. In fact, whenever you're typing Nuxt, you might accidentally type next. Nuxt and Next are very similar frameworks. The difference being Next is built for React and Nuxt is built for Vue. So when you're running create Nuxt app, it's going to guide you through configuring the app, and I'll guide you through that now. I'm not going to go too in depth on things. I'll name my project. I'm going to use TypeScript. You can use JavaScript if you want. I prefer TypeScript, and that's what I'll use for this demo. I'll use NPM. I'm going to use Bootstrap Vue, so this will install Bootstrap alongside our application so we can take advantage of the classes. I'm not going to be doing too much, too complicated styling for this demo, but I will use some Bootstrap classes to make it look somewhat pretty. We don't need to use Axios or Piwa or Content, any of this. We're going to be using WordPress as our CMS, and we'll use a different HTTP client. Let's install ESLint and Prettier. Let's use Jest. I'm not going to be creating any tests for you, but Jest is a pretty good testing framework that I use often. Let's do SSR and SSG, and we're going to do Node.js hosting. And since we're using TypeScript, we don't need a JS config. We will have a TS config for us. No CI, and we'll use Git. So what this is doing is it has laid out the scaffolding for our website, and it's running npm install. And we can go ahead and open this up in VS Code while it's continuing to run. And I can start to show you what's in here. So I'll just, let this finish installing, but I can start walking you through the next app. So right from the start, it should look similar to other apps that you've built in JavaScript and using Node and NPM. If you're familiar with Next, this should look pretty similar to a Next app. You have your package.json, your TS config, since we're using TypeScript. There's a Nuxt config, a Jest config. This is for testing. Then we have our ESLint and Prettier files and all of that good stuff. The next thing is an assets folder. This is where you might put images or fonts or something like that. Components. Components contains our Vue components, similar to React components in Next. This is just where Nuxt wants you to place them. Nuxt has a concept of layouts, so we have our default. It comes with a default layout. Middleware, we're not going to worry about this for now. You can put some middleware functions in there for server-side stuff. Pages, by default, a Nuxt.js app just has an index page, but this is where you'll put all of your pages. So we're eventually going to have an index page showing our list of posts, and then a slug page showing our individual post. Plugins, don't worry about that. Don't worry about static. Store, this is what you use to fetch data from APIs and to store it and provide it to your views. We will be creating a store because we're going to be fetching data from WordPress. And the test folder. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to start building out our pages. So before we do that, let's run npm run build, or no, npm run dev. This will run our dev site, and I'll open this up so that you can see what it looks like. There we go. It's running on localhost port 3000. And it looks like this. Looks nice, but this isn't what we want it to look like in the end. So let's go ahead and start configuring it how we like. So let's dive into the index page and see what this looks like. So in our index page, we have our template here. This is how Vue files are set up. So you have a template, you have your script, small script, then you have your styles. Let's go ahead and clear out the styles here. We're not going to use any of these. And then we don't need the logo. In fact, we can clear everything here. And we'll just start with a totally blank slate. So the first thing we want to do is this page is going to show our list of posts. In order to do that, we need to provide the template with a sample list of posts. So let's create that now. Vue has a concept of computed properties. So I will create a couple different computed properties. I'll create posts. This is going to provide a list of posts. Now notice it's a function, so we're going to return our list of posts. This will get called anytime we update state. For now, we're just going to hard code it. Eventually we will create a store and we will be returning the posts from that store. So let's just create a sample post here. We'll call it title test post, slug test post, content. This is a test post. Very, very original here. Excerpt, this is a test post. So what this does is this is creating our default list of posts. We're returning a list of just one post, and we set a default for now. I use title slug content excerpt because we will be using the WP GraphQL API, and a list of posts comes with these fields on it. So I don't want to have to change those later when we do hook up the API. The other thing I'll add here is page info. So we're going to be showing a list of posts, and you want to be able to page through the posts. So maybe we only show the first 5 posts on a page, and then we want to be able to go to the next page and see the next 5 posts. So we will be using the page information that's provided to us from the GraphQL API to handle paging through posts. So on here, for now, I'm just going to return a default object that looks similar to what we expect it will look like when we get a return from GraphQL. So that includes an end cursor, has next page. We'll just say that's false for now. Has previous page. And start cursor. All right, so we have our 2 computed properties here. Now let's create our template. So we already have our container here, and we'll stay and keep everything within the container. But we want to show a list of posts, and let's just create a list of posts as cards. So let's say this will be a div, and then we'll have h1 center, Headless WordPress Nuxt demo. And then we'll have another div, some padding, and then a div row. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, so now we have just our basic container and grid setup for WordPress. And now we want to say we're going to create a post card. So in here, let's just do a post card, and we'll get to this in a moment. But for now, I'll say v4. This is a view. We're going to say for each post in posts. The key will be post.slug, and the post is post. So what this is going to do is we need to create a postcard component, and we're going to pass it each post, and the key is just the slug of the post. Then let's also create our pagination here. So we'll do div deflex width 100, and then div margin left auto, and then we'll do a Nuxt link. This is similar to links in Next. And then we will do span next page. Okay. And then what do we need to do here? We need to only show next page if we have a next page. So let's go ahead and put the logic for that in here. So we'll use v-if, and we'll say if page info dot has next page. And then we also need to tell Next where we want to link. So we will link to equals query. We're just going to use the query string and stay on the same page. And we will use after and page info dot cursor. Oops, end cursor. All right. So that's a lot, but hopefully you're following along here. We have our postcard. We're going to send it for each post in our list of posts. We will send the post to the postcard. So we're going to need to create a postcard component to render those. And then we have our next page link here, and we will show this next page link anytime we are have a list of posts that's greater than one page. And what we'll do there is we're going to link to the query string, and we'll put after, and after equals our end cursor. So the next page will be get me posts after our previous end cursor. So now the next thing we need to do here is we need to create our postcard component. Note that we called it post-card in here, but in here we call it capital P postcard. This is just a way for you to keep kind of the best practice in terms of naming conventions. So in here, we're going to want a template. We'll use our HTML template. We're also going to need some script. We'll do the TypeScript. And I don't think we're going to use any styles. We'll just use the bootstrap styles. So let's say each post is going to be an article. And then we'll have it be a card and give it some shadow. and then card body, and then h5, the title. And then let's do this. Nuxt link. So the title is going to link to our post. And then we will do another div with card text and see what that looks like. Okay, so we have our Nuxt link. We need to fill in what the value is going to be for our Nuxt link. So we have our list of posts. Each post is showing a postcard. The title of the post should link to our single post page. So we want to link to name, what are we going to call the single post page? Let's call it slug. And then params. So rather than query params, we're going to send actual URL params, and we'll say post.slug. So that way we get a pretty URL with our post slug, and we can use that to get the post. So in here, we also want to say post.title. And we're going to have to do something interesting here. We're going to use v-html. This will render our post.excerpt as HTML in our card. One thing to note here, this is not a common practice. If you're used to React and you've done some headless WordPress development using React, you've probably used the attribute dangerously set inner HTML. This is essentially what Vue is doing here. So prettier, or not prettier, ESLint is going to yell at us for this. So I'm actually going to ignore this. When you're working with WordPress, it's going to send you HTML. So you have to, at some point, render the HTML to the screen so you can't get around it. But you can trust that your admins are creating the content, so you don't have to worry about it being dangerous. Disable next line, and I believe it's going to say no v-HTML. All right. And we'll just add a comment there. Okay. And then one thing we have to do here, see how we're doing post title, post slug, post.title, post.excerpt. We need to specify that this component is going to receive a prop similar to React props, right? In our page, we are sending it the post prop. So we need to define that in here. So I'll say props post. And this way we're going to get a post prop. It's going to, oh, I said pro. There we go. Love TypeScript. So this is going to define that this component receives a post prop and it will provide it here. And that's all that we need to do. So I'm going to restart since we added a file, and hopefully we can get this working. Takes a second. All right, here we go. We have our Headless WordPress Nuxt demo. We have our test post. We only have one post for now, and this is our default hard-coded test post. So we haven't hooked up any data yet. And if we click on this, we're going to go and it'll say, hey, page not found, because we haven't created the individual post page. So let's do that now. What did we name it? We named it slug, and we're passing a slug param. So in order to do that in Nuxt, we're going to create under slug.view. This informs Nuxt that this is a parameterized view, and we should expect a slug parameter to be sent in. So we're going to create a script here, TypeScript. TypeScript and VS Code are starting to recognize that we're using TypeScript in here. That's great. Okay, and then we also want a computed property here. But instead of our list of posts, we're just going to have an individual post, right? And for now, we will just also return. In fact, we'll just go copy it out of here. What am I missing here? Left side of the comma. There we go. So we're just going to return our default post here, and that's it. We don't need to return anything else. Now this is cheating, right? We didn't actually go and get this post from some store. We'll do that in a moment. But for now, we just want to see that this page will work. So the other thing we need to do in here is we need to add some HTML. Now that we have our computed post property, we can do that. So let's just say div.container and then h1.textCenter and then article py5. Okay, and then in here, we'll say post.title, and we'll use our handy vhtml here, post.content. So this time we're going to show all the content of the post, not just the excerpt. And we're going to have to do that same lint disable here. So I'll just go in and pull that. Whoops. Place it in here. And when it comes time to lint, we're not going to have to worry about this line. It kind of sucks that we have to do this, but it is what it is. And when you're dealing with headless WordPress, you'll find that you have to do this. I usually separate this out into a separate component, so I only have to do vhtml in one place. But for this demo, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so let's see here. I have my app running. I'll just refresh. When we click on a test post, our URL is /test-post, and we're showing our test post. This is a fake it till you make it scenario here. We have just hard coded this. We have it hard coded with the slugs. There's no real logic running here. But let's start hooking that up now. So we want to create our store. And before we create our store, what we're going to do with the store is we're going to connect it to WordPress and actually grab our list of posts. And then when we navigate, we're going to look for an individual post. So the store is going to need a couple of tools in order to make the API requests. So what I want to do here is I want to install Apollo Boost, GraphQL, isomorphic fetch. Isomorphic fetch is similar to fetch on the front end, but it works both front end on client side and on server side. And then we will also install Vue Apollo. One thing, the isomorphic fetch library doesn't come with built-in types, so I'm going to have to install typings from Definitely Typed for that. So we will also install @types/isomorphic fetch. And I'll save those to the deb dependencies. Okay, so now we have our dependencies installed. Let's create our store. So in Nuxt, it wants you to put all your stores in this store directory. So I'll go ahead and create a posts.ts file here. Now, Nuxt does some fancy magic to wrap this and create a Vuex store with it. But essentially what it provides for us is a way to export mutations and actions and state from this, a state definition from this store. So what we're going to do in here, we're going to need the TypeScript interfaces. So I will define some interfaces that equate to the data that we're expecting back from WordPress. We'll define our GraphQL queries. So what we're going to call to WordPress in order to retrieve that data. We want to set up our Apollo client, similar to how you might set it up if you're using Nuxt. We're using Apollo Boost because the normal Apollo client relies on React, and we're not using React here. The other thing we will have in here is a state definition that is defining the actual state, the objects that we're going to pass back to our pages. And we will also define mutations, so a way to change state, and actions. Actions are a way for you to fetch data. So let's start with importing some of the stuff we will need. Action context. So this is going to allow us to, this is a typing that we'll use when we're defining our actions. We will import the Apollo client. This should look familiar if you've ever used Apollo client before. GQL, since we're going to be using GraphQL. Except instead of @Apollo/client, we will use Apollo Boost. Need a comma here. And then import fetch from isomorphic fetch. We'll use this to pass it to our Apollo client when we create it. So let's define our TypeScript interfaces. First one is a post. So like we had over here, let's look at our index page. Our post at least needs these 4 values. So I'll put those in here. Luckily, these are all strings, making it easy. I'll just add another one, ID, and then URI. We're not using these, but whenever I'm making a call, this is usually like the bare minimum that I grab from GraphQL because I might need to use these values somewhere else in my application. So that's good for post. We also need this page info interface. Let's just copy it out of here. Unfortunately, this doesn't allow us to do all strings, so I will have to be crafty here. Define those as Boolean. Okay, so we have our post, we have our page info. These are our models. We'll also have an array of posts, but we don't need to create a specific interface for that. The other thing we want to export is the actual type of our state. So we want to define what our state is going to have. And our state is going to have a list of posts. It will also have a page info and a post. Okay. We've only defined interfaces for now, so we still have to provide functionality, but I like to define my interfaces here because the store is what we're using to get data from our API, and the API really defines the schema of this. Now we can always change it and have something locally, but the definition is really done at the store level, not at some other level, so I always put it in here. So the next thing we want to do is the GraphQL queries. So we're going to have 2 queries, right? We'll have one for getting the list of posts and the other for getting an individual post. I am going to copy them from my notes over here because it's a lot. And I already went and predefined some of these queries, so I'll walk you through them, but I'm going to copy them out of my notes. So I've defined a couple of fragments. This is just how I like to define these queries when I'm working with WP GraphQL. So on my posts query that gets us our list of posts, I have page info data, looks similar to this interface. And then I have list post data, which looks similar to this interface. And then I have my query, which is get posts. My query takes a couple of options. We're not going to use this where, but we will use the after, the first, and the last to do pagination. And then we just pass those directly through. We say our page info, we put our page info fragment here, and our nodes, we want to get the list data. So this is all we need in order to query WP GraphQL, get our lists of posts, and return them to our index page. The next query we have is our posts query, or our post query. In it, we have page data and post data. You don't really need this. I usually do it. If you're showing, you can create pages in WordPress. You can also create posts in WordPress, and you could use this query to do either or. And we're going to do a content node query. We'll default to a URI and then grab the post by ID. So the next thing we need to do is we need to set up our Apollo client so that we can get the data. So new Apollo client, and a couple of things the Apollo client takes. It takes a URI, and I'm just going to use one that I've already set up here, which is a demo site. So this is our demo WordPress site that already has some posts populated, and GraphQL is the link directly to the WP GraphQL API on that site. And then we also want to pass it fetch. Notice we named this fetch up here. This is so that the Apollo client will use isomorphic fetch to get all of the data. So that was easy. Now we need to create some state. So we can export function state. This will get called and it needs to return a state property. So in here, this will always return our posts state. And let's just return a default state here. So what does it want? It wants page info, post, and posts. Cool. That's lining up with this, right? Posts as just an empty array for now. And let's go ahead and say, copy this from here. I always like to have some defaults in there. Yeah, so this is going to need an ID. And it will need, what are the other things we have in here? ID, title slug, URI status. So we'll just put, URI test status published. And we'll copy this down here. And then page info, we'll also copy from here. Okay, so this is our default state. You don't really need to do this, but I just like to do it for safe measure. And it helps me to know, like, my app won't fail, but I can look at it and know, hey, I'm using this, I'm getting this test data. All right, so we also need to export some mutations. We're going to have 3 mutations in here. We will have something for setting posts, which takes in our state and also takes in posts. We'll expect a post array. And we'll say state.posts equals posts. Very, very simple. We're going to have 3 of these. So I'll just copy them. One for setting post, and then one for setting page info. page info. There we go. Very simple. We will, our actions will commit to our mutations and set state, and we'll see that right now. Let's export const actions. And we're gonna have two actions, right? We'll have one for getting the list of posts and one for getting an individual post. So our actions are async because we're gonna have to call the API. So we'll have get posts. Actions take in an action context, which has a property on it called commit. This is why we used our action context up here. So that is action context post state. And our variables, we're just going to say any for now. These are going to be our query variables that come from here. So, you know, we can pass in where, after, before, first, and last. I'm not going to define a type for these for now, but we are going to use them. So in here, I will say result equals wait client.query. And just like with the regular Apollo client, we need to pass in a query. This is our posts query and our variables. And then from there, so let's look at the query. We're going to get nodes and page info off of here. So we will say nodes page info equals result data posts, right? Yeah, posts. Oop. And then we want to call our mutations in order to set our values. So set posts nodes and set page info page info. There we go. So our get posts, when we dispatch our get post action, it's going to call our WordPress site, get the post based on this query and based on the variables that we pass in, and then it will commit those values to our state. And then on the in our Vue, we're going to eventually have our state be our computed property, which when it gets updated, it will automatically flow down to the screen. So the last thing we want to do here is a get post. This is going to look similar to our get posts, but instead of variables, we are actually going to take in a slug. So we're passing a slug in, and we're going to call the WordPress API and get an individual post based on this slug. So let's do this. I will just copy this and variables ID slug. So if I look at our post on here, yes, we're doing ID. So I'm going to pass in the slug as the ID, and I want to use the post query here. And the result is going to be content node, and the content node is actually going to be the values we want. So in there, I can say commit set post result.data.content node. And that will get us our post. So now we have our state. Just to recap, we defined our interfaces. We're going to use those in our Vue in a second. We defined our queries. This is what we're using to call the WP GraphQL API. We defined our Apollo client in here. We defined our state with just a default state. We defined mutations, how we change our state. And we defined some actions, how we fetch data and then commit it to our state. So now we need to wire this data up. Let's go back to our index.vue and wire some data up here. So in here, we need to import posts state from store posts. Okay. And this is now going to change. So we want to return. So inside of our computed property functions, we always have this. And on here, there's this dot store posts, dot state posts as post state dot posts. So what this is doing is we're going to call our post state, and we always want to return the post value from that state. And similar to that in our page info, we're going to return page info. There we go. And that's all we need for this. So let's just run this and see if it will work. And we haven't called to fetch the data, so we should be getting our default data in here. And lo and behold, yes, we are just getting our default data in here. So let's actually make the call to the API now. In order to do that, we want to do another property on here that is called async data. And what that is going to get is our store and our query, which is our query string. Now remember, I'll pull this up over here. In here, we have our next link to next page that is giving us an after param in our query string. So we want to make sure that this is passed into our store every time if it exists, so we can always get the next page if we need to. So one thing I want to do out here, let's just say like posts count, or maybe page count. No, posts count. So we're just going to hard code, each page is going to have 5 posts. So in here, we want to do store.dispatch, and we'll say posts, get posts. So we're going to dispatch the get posts, and the variables we will pass in are after, query.after, right? And really all we need is the after and first. And this is the posts count, right? Okay. So we're always going to get the first 5 posts, and we're only going to get the first 5 posts after a specific cursor every page. So if the cursor is undefined, it won't matter. If we'll just get the first 5 posts. If the cursor is defined, then we will get the next 5 posts, and so on and so forth. So let's see what this did. All right, we got our update here. We have 5 posts. These are all lorem ipsum. Now yours might look different if you're using a different WordPress site, right? But this post information is no longer our test data. This is coming directly from WordPress. And down here, looks like we have more pages. So let's click that. And we didn't get anything. And the reason here is you can see we have our query string with after. So this is our cursor. But we never made this call again. And the reason for that is when this was a client-side route, so it used the browser push state, and it didn't actually change. It changed the URL, but it didn't refresh the page. So we need to add something in here that will refresh the page. Let's do that now. So Vue has a concept of watch, and what we want to do here is we want to watch the route. You need this $route. This is a special indication to Vue to say, hey, whenever the route changes, call this method. So in here, we will refresh and scroll to Whoops, 0, 0. So this is going to refresh our page, and then it'll also scroll to the top of the page. So there. Oh, and then we need a comment here, or a comma. So now when we're in here, we have our page, we're on the main page. Once we hit the next page, it goes to the top of the page. We can go down here, hit next page, so on and so forth until we should get to an end at some point. Yep, we got to an end. So now we don't have any more. And then we'll just use our back button and we can go back. Perfect. We have our list of posts. We can go in and we can see a test post. Now, note that this is still showing the test post. It's not showing the post we want, right? So let's wire up the posts in here. So now let's go into our slug. And we need to do something similar to what we did out here. So I'm just going to copy and paste because I know that that is going to be better than me typing all of this out. So I will do this and we will return post. Remember, post is our individual post on here. And now that's all we need to do, I'm pretty sure. But nevertheless, I will refresh here. Oh. It didn't like it. So let's see what we did here. When we dispatched, we go to post/slug. In here, we're returning our computed property with a post. But one thing we're not doing in here is we are not doing the async data to get the individual post. So in here, we are returning the post that's on the state, but we're getting this test post in here, right? We're getting this. And we don't want the test post. We want to actually invoke this get post method and have it set the post and then return it here. So we will, similarly to our index, we will call this, but we want to get post. And in here, we're not going to use the query. Remember, we're sending it params. If you look at post card, it sends params with the slug. So we don't want this. We actually want to send params.slug. Now, we go in here, we see post 41 and we see all the content. Similarly, we can go and see post 39 and so on and so forth. So that about wraps it up as far as writing all of this code goes. We have our list of posts. You click a post, you see your individual post. Now, the last thing I will do, and cross your fingers here, but at this point, I'm ready to just commit this up to Git. But first, I'm going to run npm run lint. And actually, I think that by default, it doesn't use fix. I like to fix by default. And it's lint. Oh, it runs lint.js. Okay, so npm run lint. Let's see if we get any issues. We are going to get one issue. And I expected this. So one thing it's asking us here is prop post should define at least its type. What that means is in postcard.vue, it doesn't like how post is just a string in here. It wants us to actually define the post type. So what we want to do there is we want to import our post state and define this as the post. So this is why we created those interfaces, right? Store/posts. And we want to say as props definition. No, it's, yeah, it is. It's props definition, right? I think I need to import this. Import props definition. I'm doing this on purpose. I didn't want you to start running your app and then run ESLint and have to go and create another exception for this particular thing here. So there's a handy type called props definition here, and we can say it's going to be post of type post. We don't get any complaints here. And now when we lint, we shouldn't get any lint errors. All right, so you've done it. Hopefully you were able to follow along. If not, you can rewatch this video. We have all of this out on our blog as well, so you can go to our blog at developers.wpengine.com and read this post and follow along at your leisure. We also have a post on Next.js, so if you're used to working in Vue and you want to try out React and Next.js, we have a blog post on that and a video as well. So without further ado, happy coding.